Brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.
I think this self-portrait began on a bad day. A bit of a hangover or something. The darkness and the doom and gloom and...
British artist Maggi Hambling is best known for her intimate portraits, paintings of the sea and controversial public sculptures. But being something of a non-conformist, she refuses to be pigeonholed.
I mean, I'm not a painter who started out by painting milk bottles and goes on painting milk bottles for the rest of time.
If you become complacent in the way that you look at her pictures or her sculpture or her installations, she will revert and subvert your expectations of what you think that it is she does, almost perversely.
Amy Winehouse, still singing. Still singing.
Her work really, grabs you by the throat and doesn't let you go.
There are people who hate my work and there are other people who are completely indifferent to it. None of that's up to me when it's left my hands, and then it has to take care of itself. And if it becomes a controversial thing, which has happened to me, I think it just shows it's got a bit of life to it.
She's constantly, restlessly looking for new material, new sensations, new images.
Portraitist, expressionist. I don't like those ist words. I'm not an ist.
After half a century of challenging the art world, Maggi Hambling has a new exhibition at the British Museum.
Well, of course it's nerve-wracking having a show at the British Museum. I'm not sure where one could possibly have a show after the British Museum. I can only think of heaven.
Entitled Touch, the exhibition features 40 works, many of which have never been seen in public before. Primarily on paper and ranging from early pieces right through to some of her most recent works, the show reveals how drawing is at the heart of her artistic practice.
Drawing is her absolute starting point. She says that she makes a drawing every morning. It's the touch, it's the physical action of making, and through making, understanding and thinking and absorbing.
And it's all the time getting rid of your own rubbish so that something else can take over, and that does occasionally happen. So I feel with all these drawings, something else did them. Do you know what I mean? I only feel responsible for the bad ones. These are the better ones we have in this show, I hope.
Touch, of course, is something instinctive. It happens before understanding. It's as unmediated as anything can be, and I think that therefore beautifully describes this idea of an encounter is extremely important in her work.
You see the very early works, like the wonderful Rosie the Rhinoceros from Ipswich Museum, and it's all there, the intensity of the gaze, the bristling with life. It's a stuffed rhinoceros, but you wouldn't know it. It's charging towards you, looking rather like Maggie with the beady eye as well. And so already you've got that intensity of engagement.
So we begin at the beginning.
Maggi Hambling was born in 1945 and raised in rural Suffolk, where she still lives and works. Her first step towards becoming an artist happened quite by accident.
When I was 14, there was an art exam at school, and I did nothing but flick paint at people and generally draw attention to myself because I was deeply in love with the biology mistress invigilating the exam. And then I saw the clock and it was 3:20, so better do something. So I did a painting in 10 minutes, and when the results came out, 3 weeks later, I was top of art. So I thought, well, this is worth looking into.
At the age of 15, Hambling met artist Let Haynes, who was one of her teachers at the East Anglian School of Painting and Drawing. Let would become Maggie's mentor.
I worked with Let, and he said, the most important thing anyone said, you must make your work your best friend, that you can go to it. Whatever you're feeling tired, you're feeling bored, you're feeling happy, you're feeling miserable, you're feeling randy, you're feeling whatever you're feeling, and go to your work and have a conversation with it. And that's how I've lived my life.
It was Let Haynes who encouraged Hambling to approach her work with the same restless curiosity that has stayed with her throughout her career.
He encouraged experiment, experiment, experiment. So, I mean, everything has to be an experiment, otherwise it's dead.
It was the start of the swinging 60s when Hambling attended both Camberwell and the Slade schools of art. This was a time of radical change and significant new movements in the art world.
I worked consistently in the Life Room, but I made experiments into op art, into pop art, into all those things. So many things were going on. And I know you're not supposed to remember the 60s, but I remember quite a lot of it.
After leaving art school, Hambling continued to hone her skills, creating a body of primarily figurative work. But it wasn't until 1980 that she gained wider recognition, when she was chosen as the first ever artist in residence at the National Gallery in London.
It was marvellous. I was sort of in at 8 o'clock in the morning, before the people, and I could stay in the evening.
Having unrestricted access to the National Gallery allowed her to produce studies of some of the great works in the collection. It also meant that she was exposed to public scrutiny.
I painted self-portrait as a performing monkey, because this was the thing, there were the serious things of making the studies from the paintings and what I learned from doing that. And then also, there were posters around saying, meet a real artist, like, people were going to sort of come up and poke you. And I mean, people thought it was an amazing idea to put a living artist in with all those pictures by dead people. It was regarded as pretty controversial.
From early on in her career, Maggi Hambling became renowned for her distinctive approach to portraiture. Over the years, she's painted a range of notable subjects, from strangers to larger-than-life personalities, like her great friend, the London dandy Sebastian Horsley, whose portrait is part of her latest exhibition at the British Museum.
This drawing was done from the life in my studio with the Hermes scarf, as you see, floating around the nakedness of Sebastian. And I called him my wicked son because he called me mother. And I was very fond of him, and he posed for me quite a lot. Paint a portrait is a bit like a love affair. I mean, because it's a very intense thing, and at the end of it, you hope a decent painting will come out of it, and not a broken heart. I mean, it's all about love, and so you have to get into this place where all your own baggage is got rid of, and the truth of the person in front of you can come through you.
I think the sheer richness of these portraits, whether it's Max Wall looking utterly tragic, whether it's Stephen Fry falling asleep, they're all incredibly tender, and they give such a spectrum of emotional engagement and response. So you look at them and you don't get any one response. You really do see these people in a state of sort of psychological flux and change. They do live in front of you, and that's Maggie's empathy.
In the portraits, there's a sense in which she is touching them through her medium, be it graphite, monotype, charcoal, or paint. But at the same time, there's a sense in which the viewer is being invited into that very intimate, sometimes indeed erotic encounter with the subject.
Many of Hambling's muses were close friends, family and lovers, and the emotional connection between subject and artist continued to inspire her, even in their dying moments and beyond.
I recorded the last almost 2 weeks of my father's life in Ipswich Hospital, sat beside the bed with his sketchbook, which now belongs here. And that was made the day he died. We're artists are very lucky in that they have this, in the case of someone who dies, this positive way of grieving, So you're doing something positive when inside there's a great hole.
These they're never maudlin, they're never sentimental. There's a sort of a fierceness there, a kind of fierce love, and a very objective gaze. And it's incredibly poignant, but never schmaltzy in any way, shape, or form. These are memento mori, in a way, but they're also gestures of extreme affection and extreme compassion, and, you know, really, I think, almost unique in contemporary art.
It's that humanity in portraiture that Hambling both strives for herself and is attracted to in the work of other artists.
This is a self-portrait by Rembrandt as a young man, and I call him Ronnie. So he's, you know, sort of like a chum. You have this human encounter with this little drawing, and it is just a mastery of the economy and yet the feeling. And so you have, with any portrait, a conversation, a visual conversation, and this business of the human hand making this set of marks, then there's something else going on in this drawing than just a pure likeness.
You do feel it with Maggie, that when she's looking at other artists, you feel incredible focus. Forget art criticism. The best art criticism is an artist like Maggie looking at another artist. And that informs the work. And it informs the work in an incredibly responsible way.
The British Museum has been collecting Hambling's work for over 30 years. But portraits are only part of the dazzling range of subject matter and themes on display in this new exhibition. Maggi Hambling's approach also extends beyond the two-dimensional and the confines of a gallery. British artist Maggi Hambling stands out as a singular and uncompromising force in today's art world. Although she initially made her name as a painter, her prolific and often controversial output defies categorisation and embraces a great many different media. In 1998, Hambling made her first public sculpture, A Conversation with Oscar Wilde.
Oscar Wilde came into my life when his stories for children were read to us, my first school. And there was this voice from another place, you know. I grew up in sort of rural Suffolk, and suddenly there was this other place, this exotic place, this extraordinary place, this magical place, this place of the imagination.
When it was unveiled on the 30th of November 1998, the sculpture caused quite a stir.
I think what some people find difficult with some of Maggie's work is that she just goes full throttle, you know, and the Oscar Wilde sculpture that caused such a furore, I mean, there he is, loopity on the ground. It's a very particular view. They take no prisoners, her works. And I think, you know, in the slightly uptight art world, perhaps people find that difficult.
You don't think of any of these things when you make a thing. You know, you make the thing. It goes out into the world, and then, you know, it has to take care of itself. I mean, Oscar Wilde said, you know, this good thing, when the critics are divided, the artist is at one with himself. So, you know, it's all water off a duck's back.
Hambling's next public sculpture, Scallop, created in 2003, also received a mixed reception. Inspired by another of her heroes, composer Benjamin Britten, and pierced with words from his opera Peter Grimes, the 4-metre-high steel sculpture is situated on Aldborough Beach in Suffolk.
It had been in the papers about Aldborough not wanting to recognise its most famous son, and it made me quite cross. And that's why I decided I was going to try and do something myself. I sort of made it for, perhaps someone in a bad love affair, wandering lonely by the sea, thinking about life and death and all those big things, that, that conversation with the good old horizon that people tend to have with the sea. Of course, it's entirely covered with children, which is great, and lovers have met underneath it, and actually people have got married at it, and there's apparently been a couple of funerals at it. It's become, amazingly, sort of a place of sort of pilgrimage.
It was also on the Suffolk coast that Maggi Hambling's next muse came crashing into her life in a characteristically unexpected and tempestuous fashion.
On November the 30th, 2002, I'd driven to the sea, Thorpeness, I think, in the early morning, and there was a huge storm raging. The shingle was being tossed. The waves were high, the sea was charging, and it was very exciting. And I came back here, and what I was actually painting was a little portrait, 12 inches by 10, a portrait from memory of a London beggar. And what was inside me, what had actually entered me that day, was this storm. And so on that same canvas, I turned this little portrait of the beggar into my first little sea painting. And that has gone on, and the North Sea still has me by the short and curlies.
Immersed in her obsession with the sea, Hambling created her Walls of Water series in 2013, touching on themes that have consistently seeped into all of her work.
The sea, I suppose it's a metaphor for life and death and recycling and all of that. It's also very sexy. You see a distant wave gradually fumbling about, approaching until it reaches the shore, and it's pretty orgasmic when it crashes, when it dissolves. So there's all that going on.
They really were amazingly kind of intense evocation of the salty, sea-like sensation, but also with Maggi, emotionally charged. And that's her genius, I think, is that she can combine reality, sensation, and feeling.
I like the way people see, particularly in the Walls of Water, they see animals, faces, figures, and they're not there consciously. It's just that when you're really in the zone, as a tennis player would call it, you haven't a clue what's going on, and that's the best state to be in. The muse is really present, and something has taken over, and so when it's going right, it paints itself.
As a major inspiration, the sea has played its part in Maggi Hambling's career for over a decade. She continues to be acutely sensitive to the world around her, and recently has brought her intense gaze to some of the most troubling subjects of our time, from international conflict to global warming. Throughout Maggi Hambling's career, she's pushed at the boundaries of what her art can be, all the while preoccupied by the fragility of human existence. Her 2013 visceral installation, War Requiem, was a confrontational exploration of death and destruction. It gave rise to a new, ongoing body of work that in its own unique way explores rebirth and resurrection.
The Aftermath series of sculptures are partly inspired by half-worn-away gargoyles on churches and those ancient little remains and bits of things you see in glass cases in museums. That is one piece of wood. It's called Sleeper, and it's one piece of wood. I simply added a piece underneath to get the angle of the head right, and I encouraged the slit that was already there as the mouth.
Aftermath, in a way, it's the aftermath of everything she's done throughout her career. She picked up pieces of wood that she felt were suggestive or interesting or intriguing in some way, and then worked into them using plaster, creating these strange gargoyle-like heads or parts of bodies, these strange fragmentary creatures in a way, that are then finally painted in multiple coats of oil paint and cast in bronze.
This is going to be in the Edge show, and it's entitled Politician. See, it's rather hollow.
Some of the aftermath sculptures will feature in a forthcoming exhibition in March 2017 called Edge at Marlborough Fine Arts in London. For this show, Hambling has also been putting together a brand new series of paintings, creating works which allude to the fallout from current conflicts, as well as addressing the vulnerability of the natural world.
The subject is the melting of the ice caps, which I'm convinced is going on, and which upsets me. I hope there is the sensation of the ice melting in front of your eyes.
The war in Syria and its repercussions have been at the forefront of Maggie's mind.
It's called Trafficker Drifting, and it went through many stages, and there were a lot of little people in the boat when it started, and they gradually went.
It's what Yeats called a terrible beauty, and you need beauty to drive your engagement with the painting. It feels like Maggie's grabbing you by the arm, pulling you in and stabbing her finger and said, look. So if one is looking at the obscenity of a bombed Aleppo, this isn't a description of that, but it is a description of the emotions that are pulled out of us viscerally as a consequence of that.
I remember when I was at the Slade, I had a friend who was writing a book. Whether the book was ever finished, I don't know, but I remember the title was Peace, the Impossible Concept. I mean, it's a very good title, because, you know, wherever you look, I mean, one war may be over, but another 5 or 6 have started, and war seems to be a constant. This is a new one. It's a medieval torture instrument.
5 decades on, Maggi Hambling still refuses to be pinned down. Whether it's in drawings, paintings, sculptures or installations, she continues to put all her energy and passion into her art, following her muse wherever it may lead her.
What I love about her is that she's been a kind of consistent irritant. She's a bit itchy and she's a bit difficult and she's a bit hard to categorize.
It's Beethoven, it's not me.
You can hold her up against anything that's being made today, and because you know it kind of comes from this place of integrity, that even if you didn't like it, and even if it irked you a little bit, it brings you into an understanding of what art might be able to do.
She's an important artist, and an artist who will have longevity, because she has, throughout her career, ignored fashion, ignored what's cool, what's considered a given moment by the art world perhaps to be important, and has absolutely pursued her own path. Not in ignorance or obliviousness of what other people think, but with an absolute faith in the meaning and importance of what she does.
I think what marks Maggie out is that she has just such incredible humanity, empathy, and an ability to get the essence of the subject, whether it's Max Hall or whether it's a wave. You kind of feel they really are there because she's put every inch of herself into it.
I don't understand any of this business, but I mean, if I did, I don't think there'd be a lot of point in doing it. You know, you're attempting the impossible. That's the point, really.
Brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.
People in the